I'm sure you've encountered the Tuanon portion of the Dolphins fan base, and the people who are constantly defending Tua. Where do you stand on Tua? What is Tua Tagovailoa to you as an observer and a neutral observer who nonetheless is very close with the team?
Yeah, I have encountered the wrath of Tuanon or the Tuaneers time and time again, because I haven't been shy about expressing my opinion about Tua, that I don't think he's an elite quarterback. He's a good quarterback who at times has been very good, who at times has been excellent. Mm-hmm. But I also think, if we're going to be honest, a large part of the success comes with playing surrounded by what I would suggest is the fastest set of skill position players, not just in the NFL today, but maybe in NFL history. Mm-hmm. I mean, Jesus. And the Dolphins, what they've done is they've tailored everything offensively to fit what Tua does best, and it's been a great marriage. It's worked well, except when it's taken away by better teams, by better opponents. No, it's not all on Tua, but if you're going to focus a lot on his overall one-loss record and his stats, well, it's not all on him either, because he's getting a lot of help. So it's got to work both ways. What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Miami extended one of its star wide receivers this offseason, but the other is looking for a new deal as well. Isn't every wide receiver this offseason? Oh, also looking for a no deal? The Dolphins' polarizing signal caller, Tua Tagovailoa. Will one, both, or neither of Tua and Tyreek get a new deal this offseason? Oh, and can Devon Achane, 2023's efficiency king, keep it up with an increased workload? Alan Pupar of Sports Illustrated has had several run-ins with Tuanon. How much longer will he have to deal with that? He gives his predictions. I'm Joe Dolan. Like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the FantasyPoints YouTube channel for 32 breakdowns of all 32 NFL teams. This is the fantasy franchise focus for the Miami Dolphins. Okay, Alan, so I want to cut right to the chase here. What's going on with the Tua Tagovailoa contract? I'm sure you knew that was coming. Do you expect something to get done soon here with the Dolphins?
Oh, that's a $64,000 question, isn't it? For those old enough to know what that reference is about. Yeah, it's a good question. I think all along the feeling has been that something absolutely positively will get done. Only a matter of when. Now you're here talking, especially after Tua made the comment after a minicamp practice that the market is a market. And then Jared Goff, this was after Jared Goff got his big contract from the Lions and before Trevor Lawrence got his big contract from the Jaguars. And then there comes a report that the Dolphins are now willing to go to Jared Goff levels with Tua. Well, if they're doing that and he's sticking to the market is the market position, we have a standoff. The Dolphins do have in their back pocket the fact that Tua is scheduled to play on his fifth-year option. He is under contract for 2024. Ideally, if they view Tua as their quarterback of the future, which all indications and what they have said publicly suggest he is, they don't want a quarterback who's going to go into the 2024 season less than thrilled with his situation. So I do believe that something eventually will be worked out, but one side's going to have to budge.
Tyreek Hill recently made a comment that, he's 30 now and he's seeing all this money creeping up in the wide receiver market. And he's like, why not me? He recently made a comment, hey, I'm looking for a new deal too. Jaylen Waddle already got his. Is there a chance that Tyreek Hill has to get paid too in addition to Tua? And is there any any seeds of discontent there with Tyreek?
Yeah, it's kind of a similar situation. Tyreek's under contract for the next 3 years, technically. But his guaranteed money ends after 2024, number one. And then number two is he's no longer the top guy at wide receiver in terms of annual average because he's been passed by Justin Jefferson and A.J. Brown. And I believe either Amon-Ra St. Brown passed him or tied him. Very close. And again, you can always look at what's the actual guaranteed money per every year as opposed to the annual average, what's out there thrown for comparison purposes, always is the annual average. And well, Tyreek is at 30 million. That was based on his 4-year extension for 30 million, which he may not see the end of, depending on how things work out. So yeah, Tyreek has been very vocal about the fact that he does want a contract. The Dolphins don't have to give him a contract. He is 30 years old for a wide receiver. He has ended each of the past 2 seasons with lower leg injuries, ankle, and been at less than 100%. Wasn't just last year when it was very obvious after he was injured in that Monday night game against Tennessee, but the previous year as well. But the flip side to that is Tyreek Hill is the most important player on the team. He's the two-time team MVP in his 2 years with the Dolphins. And while there are a lot of good skill position players on that offense, I've maintained and said all along that it's Tyreek Hill that makes it special.
Yeah, and so if you were to think the Dolphins were to prioritize one of those guys for 2024, and I know it's not a binary question, but Tyreek's kind of the team MVP, do you think it would be him?
Man, except if we're prioritizing the better player, it's Tyreek Hill.
Yeah.
However, he's older. If Tua's your guy at quarterback, who's going to be there longer? Logically, it's Tua. He also plays a more important position. He's younger, and his contract situation is less ideal right now because nobody's going to feel sorry for what Tyreek is making this year. I know his cap number is about 30 mil. I don't have the numbers exactly what he's getting paid this year, but I think it's more than Tua's 23.2 million. So I think the Dolphins would prioritize Tua over Tyreek.
Yeah. Tyreek's cap number, according to Over the Cap at least, is $31.3 million this year, and then there's no guaranteed money next year, and his cap number would be $34.2 million. So obviously, he's looking to push in some of that money into the future years for sure. Now, I want to circle back to Tua. I'm sure you've encountered the Tuanon portion of the Dolphins fan base, and the people who are constantly defending Tua. Where do you stand on Tua? What is Tua Tagovailoa to you as an observer and a neutral observer who nonetheless is very close with the team?
Yeah, I have encountered the wrath of Tuanon or the Tuaneers time and time again because I haven't been shy about expressing my opinion about Tua that I don't think he's an elite quarterback. He's a good quarterback who at times has been very good, who at times has been excellent.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think, if we're going to be honest, a large part of the success comes with playing surrounded by what I would suggest is the fastest set of skill position players, not just in the NFL today, but maybe in NFL history.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jesus. I mean, Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill at wide receiver, Raheem Mostert, Achane at running back. I mean, you're talking about 4 guys. I mean, that's a 4x100 team right there. It's ridiculous. And with Tyreek himself, what he does to opposing defenses, if you watch those overhead shots, the all-22, of the way defenses react to Tyreek when he gets at full speed, 15 yards on the field, it's amazing. To me, it's something I've never seen before. And the Dolphins, what they've done is they've tailored everything offensively to fit what Tua does best, and it's been a great marriage. It's worked well, except when it's taken away by better teams, by better opponents. If you look at the record against, and it's not all on Tua, I want to be clear about this, the record against teams that went on to the playoffs that year for the past 2 seasons, if we include the playoff loss at KC, is 1-12 in the past 13. Okay, well, no, it's not all on Tua, but if you're going to focus a lot on his overall one-loss record and his stats, well, it's not all on him either because he's getting a lot of help. So it's got to work both ways. And the other point about Tua benefiting from the guys around him, well, in 2020 and 2021, where his numbers and his stats were pedestrian at best, what you heard a lot was, well, he doesn't have anybody else to play on. Look who he's throwing to. Well, what does that tell you? That tells you he's going to be successful if he has studs around him. And I understand every quarterback needs good receivers around them, but it's always how much do you need good weapons around you that separates quarterbacks. For example, a Patrick Mahomes and a Josh Allen, I would make the argument, need a lot less around them than Tua does. So very long-winded answer to your question. I think Tua is a good NFL quarterback. I probably have him around 12 to 15 among NFL quarterbacks. But I don't, to me, unless he takes a next step and elevates his team at crunch time in the playoffs, I would not use the word elite.
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks, maybe who are using the neutral observation, would kind of put him in that Jared Goff tier. And that's where you said the Dolphins might not actually be willing to go with his contract, which I find pretty fascinating. Let's go to the running back position. Alan, you said you used to play fantasy. You've done it in the past. The fantasy game has changed a little bit, but in recent years, especially at the running back position, we're looking for different archetypes of players. And Devon Achane is fascinating to me because this is a guy who played, I believe, 11 games last year, and 12 including the playoffs, and he had 10 or more carries 5 times. Mm-hmm. Alan, but he is being drafted as the 7th running back off the board, ahead of guys like Derrick Henry, for instance. So the fantasy community is really putting a lot of faith into the fact that not only is he going to maintain maybe not historical levels of efficiency, which obviously you're well aware he had this past year, but he's going to maintain elite efficiency and certainly get more carries this year than he did last year on a per game basis. Do you think that's a fair prediction to make for Devon Achane's season? Because he needs both more carries and still elite efficiency to pay off where he's getting drafted. Is that a fair expectation for him?
Because here's the thing. It's really tough to talk anybody out of it just based on the explosiveness that he showed. And it's like, and again, Raheem Mostert is fast and Devon Achane might be faster. It's like if there's a little crease where your average quarterback's going to get 7-8 yards out of it, well, Achane's going to get 30 or 35 or 50. Yeah, I don't know exactly how many more carries he's going to get because I think there's a ceiling in terms of the amount of use that you want to put on him. I do think he's going to get perhaps more involved in the passing game, but this is an offense also that has so many options because I mentioned like the 4 speedsters, and we haven't even gotten now to Odell Beckham Jr., who they signed in the offseason, or Jonnu Smith, to bring a pass-catching element at tight end if they decide to use it. And I'm not even mentioning the rookie 4th-round pick, Jaylen Wright from Tennessee, who, by the way, is another speedster, who could come into the equation, even though I get the feeling he may be there just to learn a year behind Mostert. But to go back to your question, yeah, he's tough because I think everything we saw in him, mind you, he was a rookie. And it's like basically every time he touches the ball, you're thinking it could go 6.
Yeah.
So I get the excitement. In a very roundabout way to answer your question, I would be more confident about Achane delivering than I would Raheem Mostert being able to come anywhere close to 18 rushing touchdowns again.
Yeah, so I wanted to circle that back and make just kind of make this a binary question. If you had, assuming health, which is impossible to do with Raheem Mostert, but Achane also had injury problems last year. Assuming health, would you predict Achane has more carries than Mostert this year?
No. If they're both healthy, Mostert's still going to be the main guy. I don't think Achane's built to be necessarily a workhorse type of back. He was more of a complimentary guy. But again, this is for non-fantasy purposes, for the Dolphins purposes, that's fine because he does so much with every touch that he has that it's not an issue. For fantasy purposes, yeah, that would be the one hesitation you would have about drafting Achane very high.
Fantasy drafters pay attention to that because that could mean that Raheem Mostert remains yet again for the 2nd consecutive year a screaming value for fantasy football. I did want to ask briefly about Jaylen Wright, who you touched on. One of the things that I was thinking of here, and fantasy drafters are kind of taking it the same way. You kind of view this as the Dolphins have an archetype, and there was a guy sitting there in the 4th round and they really just couldn't pass on him. Is that what, and he could be a redshirt year for Jaylen Wright? Is that kind of how you feel about him?
Oh, absolutely. And to show you how much they wanted him is they didn't have a 4th round pick. They traded a 2025 3rd round pick to the Eagles to get him. So, and this was it was similar to Achane last year because if we remember, the Dolphins 2022 running back core was solid, not necessarily spectacular, but it was solid. the Dolphins re-signed all 4 of them in free agency. So then when they took Achane in the 3rd round with the second of their own, only 4 picks in the 2023 NFL draft, that screamed, that's like, oh yeah, they really wanted that dude bad because they saw something special. And the special obviously is the speed. So yeah, they do have a type. It's all about speed, and more speed. How much of a duplicate of Achane is Jaylen Wright? And if that's the case, do the Dolphins really need to be spreading out the workload among Mostert, Achane, and Jaylen Wright and not give any carries to somebody who would be more of a quote-unquote power back, whether that be Jeff Wilson Jr. or Chris Brooks?
So the Dolphins were one of those teams last year, and kind of have been under McDaniel. We like them for fantasy because not only do they score points, they put the ball in the hands of their good players. You know, they don't, and it's kind of funny that Jonnu Smith is now on this team because a lot of fantasy players would argue Arthur Smith in Atlanta put the ball in his hands way too much. But I think he's an interesting fit here. And if you had to bet on either Jonnu Smith or Odell Beckham, who you brought up, I know they play 2 different positions, but if you had to bet on one of those 2 guys making a bigger overall impact on the offense in 2024, which of the 2 would you pick?
Oh, that's a great question. That's why you get paid the big bucks to ask those tough questions.
No
that's
kidding.
a very good one.
Yeah.
I think Jonnu Smith is likely to have more of an impact if for no other reason than he becomes a red zone target or a goal line target, something they necessarily have at the position or they chose not to use. I mean, the Dolphins not having one single touchdown from the tight end position last year when they were, the 2nd highest scoring team in the NFL, led the NFL in total yards. It's pretty amazing, actually. And Dolphins did very well in the red zone. They were not as good. They were middle of the pack, I think, and a little lower than middle of the pack in goal-to-go situations. You can't help but think maybe this is where Jonnu Smith really can help. In terms of overall number of catches, I would imagine it'll probably be similar between Beckham and Jonnu Smith. I think the touchdown potential is much higher with Jonnu Smith.
One more player I want to ask about just before we get out is another speedster the Dolphins drafted, 6th round, Malik Washington, the wide receiver out of Virginia. What have they said about him, and what kind of role might he have? Could he be in the return mix early in the season?
Oh, they haven't said anything. The Dolphins don't say anything beyond, he'll be given a chance to compete, and we'll see what he can do and all that. So that's you'll get nothing specific out of them. I have a hard time envisioning him having a major role. And since we're talking fantasy, I would use extreme caution before taking him. They do have options as returner. They have Braxton Berrios, who they re-signed at wide receiver. He's a very, very good, dependable returner. And he's a guy who clearly would be you would be on the roster as your returner and a 4th or 5th wide receiver. Now, with the new kickoff rules, which are going to create more returns, it's entirely possible the Dolphins will want perhaps somebody more explosive back there. And I don't know, that's not Malik Washington's calling card. This is maybe Achane gets more touches that way. It could be the Dolphins use, if they wanted to, they could use Jaylen Waddle, they could use Tyreek Hill. They have options aplenty for that new kickoff rule. So with Malik Washington, yeah, he has a great resume coming out of Northwestern and Virginia during his college career. I'm not so sure. I don't see him as a clear back end of the roster wide receiver where if there are no injuries, I'm not convinced there's a major role for him as a rookie.
His name is Alan Poupar. He is the Miami Dolphins publisher for the Sports Illustrated Fan Nation Network, and he's also the host of the All Dolphins podcast. You want to follow him on Twitter, X, whatever you call it, at Poupar NFL. That's Poupart, and you'll get the Tua updates on there. And if he ever even mildly criticizes Tua on his Twitter feed, click on the responses because I'm sure you're going to see some of the craziest people in the United States of America and beyond. Alan, it was wonderful talking to you. Thank you for joining me on this edition of the Fantasy Franchise Focus. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Joe.